Good to see you out there, Dave and Randy, Jim. We got a lot of folks coming in now. All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? For those of you who've been with us previously, you'll notice that I am a different face than you're usually familiar with. I am not AJ Kuftick. I'm just going to be playing him on TV today. My name is Mike Fulton. I am one of the digital strategists here at Expedient. I head up that team. And I'm excited to have a discussion today with Mike Walker. Mike is the CTO of Industry Cloud Strategy over at Microsoft. And we're going to talk about the race to the cloud that all of our organizations are undergoing right now, and how you can design a cloud solution that leverages multiple platforms to be able to bring that strategy to life. So I'm excited to have that conversation with Mike today. But first, a couple of housekeeping things I did want to go over with you really quickly. If you are here for the first time, we do use the Q&A panel here on Zoom. So right down here in the bottom somewhere, you should see a Q&A button. Ask you to put any questions that you have throughout the discussion today into that Q&A panel. I'll be monitoring that while we have our discussion. Also, we'll have a chance to answer some questions at the end as well. We will be recording this. You'll get a link as a follow-up in your email to the recording. You can also find this at go.expedient.com/webinar replays. It will also be available to you on twitter.com/expedient, Instagram.com_expedient, youtube.com/expedient, and linkedin.com/company/expedient. And we are live streaming on both LinkedIn and YouTube. So hi to all of our LinkedIn and YouTube friends out there today. So be sure to reach out and follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever your environment of choice is. We'd love to have you engage us in the discussion. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to our conversation. So Mike, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know either Mike or myself, Mike and I have go way back. Mike and I have been friends for about 15 years, and Mike's got a great history working at some awesome tech companies, as well as some thought leadership companies like Microsoft and HP and Gartner. And he also spent some time as a chief architect and a CTO at various companies. So Mike's got a great background and experience. And as we mentioned when we were starting out, Mike is currently the CTO of Industry Cloud Strategy over at Microsoft. So Mike, maybe you could start by just telling us a little bit about what does it mean to be an industry cloud strategist for Microsoft?
Being an industry cloud strategist for Microsoft, that's a fully loaded question, but I'll try my best to answer it as succinctly as possible. So being an industry cloud strategist, really my role is to help the company define what are our core operating tenets, our principles for going into this particular marketplace. You know, Microsoft traditionally has been a company that has built platforms, but more horizontally, that addresses any and every industry. And oftentimes within that context, it was focused on developers. Now we're in this next stage of evolution where, you know, we've taken our cloud-based solutions and we felt that we've had a very strong market position where we've said, hey, we've got this platform as a service type of capability that moves us from the developer and infrastructure to more of technology capability. And as we went along that journey, we started to realize more and more from our customers, really, that they really seek more. They want, you know, faster acceleration. And I think COVID really amplified this because it really required industries to skill up fast. And we know that there is a skill set shortage with traditional end user organizations like banks or insurance companies or manufacturers, et cetera. And so our customers were telling us, hey, you know, it's great that you've got, you know, platforms as a service, but we're in an industry and we've got certain requirements, we've got certain regulations, we've got certain ways in which we do our business. And while platform as a service is useful to help accelerate that journey, it doesn't get them as far as they could go. And so as a strategist for Microsoft, my role is to help steer the company in the right direction to define, if we're going to build an industry cloud, how do we help our customers directly? But also, how do we help our partners? Because the last thing Microsoft wants to do when we say industry cloud is provide software as a service type of capability. We don't want to, step on the toes of our ISVs, which are building, technologies and business solutions, line of business apps, et cetera. And, we certainly don't want to step on the toes of our system integrators as well. We want to make sure that they don't feel disenfranchised. So it's this delicate balance of making sure that we are still empowering our customers to accelerate their digital journeys, while also, taking a page from our tried and true playbook, which has been to embrace that partner ecosystem and knowing that every enterprise is going to be a heterogeneous enterprise. They're not just going to be on Azure. While, as a shareholder, I would love that, but that's not the case. The reality of the matter is there's different platforms that are suited better for certain problems. And, as an industry cloud architect and strategist, my goal is to make sure that we understand, folks like here at Expedient, how do we partner better together so that we can address the unique requirements only an Expedient could provide for our customers? And how do we create that better together story? And so in the cloud world, while we like to think of this kind of utopian one cloud to rule them all, that's never the case in my experience with customers. It's always going to be a heterogeneous landscape for very real business reasons. So that's at a high level, as succinct as I could make it to kind of cover most of the ground of, kind of how we think about this industry strategy role.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. I love the way you kind of laid that out for us. And it kind of reminds me of a conversation we had with one of our folks. I'll give a shout out to Steve Gruder here from Expedient, who said at the end of the day, we're not competing as Expedient with Microsoft or Microsoft with Expedient or whatnot. It's really a situation where we're trying to design the right components to the overall architecture to deliver the business outcomes that the customer is trying to land on, right? And so I think thinking about our two organizations as components in a bigger, broader multi-cloud architecture that an organization is taking advantage of is a great way to think about it, and a way that I think works really, really well. In fact, we've got a whole, I'll just make a quick plug here for, if you go to go.expedient.com/cloudrace, you'll see a whole set of web pages dedicated to how Microsoft and Expedient can better together solve the problems that you as customers might have. So I love that. So beyond this idea of industry clouds, which obviously Microsoft is really helping set some key industry direction for, you also have a lot of experience in technology innovation, right, Mike? You spent some time at Gartner. You wrote the technology top technology trends series that they would do annually. Maybe talk a little bit about what you did there, as well as what do you see as some of the key technology innovations going on in the cloud in general, but also where are we really applying that in industry clouds?
Yeah. So, thanks for the shout out there. So, my role at Gartner, I was their VP of technology innovation and CTO strategy at Gartner. And, my role was to lead a series of teams, ranging from artificial intelligence, IoT, quantum, et cetera, and really define the agenda for how we speak about all up as Gartner emerging technologies. And that role spanned the gambit of how would a company build an innovation capability within their company? How would they build something like an innovation lab? How would they conduct hackathons? How do you take a company that is maybe 60, 70, 80, 100 years old, and how do you transform that culture into a culture of innovation? And so it ranged from helping organizations themselves figure out how to innovate, to identifying and doing the trend spotting in the marketplace to understand, what are the different types of trends out there that, you have to look out for. And so, Mike, you had mentioned the top 10 strategic trend report. I authored that with another Gartner fellow. And, that was the most read piece of research from Gartner because it took this lens of over the next 2 to 3 to 4-ish years, what are going to be the most impactful technologies to business? And we kind of kept it as clean and as simple as that. But I authored other reports like the emerging technologies hype cycle, which takes us much further out, takes us 10 years out to show, yes, there are these short-term strategic trends that will influence our technology strategies at our organizations. But also we have to keep in mind that there's these longer term trends that will most certainly impact us, and how do we connect those dots? And so that was really interesting experience because I was able to glean from that, one, how to rationalize this flood of information that we get all the time as technology and innovation leaders. We always get, the headline article of this is going to be the major technology that's going to change everything in the world, right? How do you decipher that? How do you have, the decoder ring to say, oh yeah, this is something I really need to take seriously? And so being able to come up with a framework to translate all the noise in the industry into not only what are the most, from a technology purist perspective, what are the most relevant technologies, but two, we also know that your business and what you're trying to accomplish in your business, those trends will look different to you based on your very specific business outcomes that you want to achieve. And so part of that decoding is, one, squelching the noise, but two, another big part of this is, how do I pick the technology trends that are going to be most strategically relevant to me and add the most value to me in the short and long term? And so how that translates and bridges into the second part of questions that you had for me, Mike, around what does this mean from a cloud, industry cloud perspective, is, I think a big part of evaluating these trends and how we implement these trends in the cloud is no different than how we would do it on-prem, to be clear about that. But I think it's, how do we seize opportunities that will help not gradually, incrementally better our business, but where are those leapfrog moments where we can take a technology, let's take one that's overly hyped. Let's take blockchain. We've all heard about this technology. We've heard the good, the bad, and the ugly about it. I spent, a few years, actually going deep into that technology. And I can tell you that as a trend, understanding that while there is a lot of buzz around this, the adoption rate is going to take a long time. It's going to take, 5 to 10 years for this to be mainstream. And so when I think about this in my cloud implementations, in industry cloud implementations, I want to make sure that I don't back myself into the corner. I want to make sure that when it comes to peer-to-peer data sharing or immutability or being able to track and trace assets across a diverse supply chain, that I'm solving the near-term goals of now, but also I'm putting into consideration these technologies that are on the forefront. And maybe, and this is a business decision, not a technology decision, but maybe we want to be an early adopter of this technology. And that's fine too. But again, it comes back to, what is the level of risk that my business is willing to take? And so that ties into the topic of industry. Every industry is going to be different. We see blockchain is very popular within financial services. Why? Because we're dealing with currency, we're dealing with money. And I'm not talking about the cryptocurrency aspect. I'm talking about blockchain for business use. There is a strong need to audit. There's a strong need to proactively address fraud in those markets. And so that's why blockchain, as a very transparent, immutable peer-to-peer data sharing, data quality enhancing, more master data management oriented technology, why it's so popular for an industry like that. But if I were looking at maybe retail and consumer goods, I might not focus on blockchain as much. I might go with more tried and true technologies because I can't control those endpoints through a regulation that mandates blockchain-like capability. I've got to work within the environments in which I'm given, right? So, very broadly, that's how I'd answer that question, Mike.
So Mike, I think you make an interesting point. So one of the things that we talk about when we do some of our discussions, we talk about the idea that cloud as a technology is critically important. It's actually a foundational technology in today's day and age, but cloud is different than your digital transformation. It's foundational to your digital transformation. Emerging technologies like blockchain might be critical elements of your digital transformation, but your digital transformation is about much more. So I wanted to ask you to maybe talk just a little bit about one of the kind of cutting edge ways that organizations are thinking about their digital transformations, and that's in the context of platform businesses and ecosystems. I know you authored a book on the topic of ecosystems, and maybe you could share a little bit of one of your examples on how organizations are leveraging more of an ecosystem model.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, when we look at companies around the globe, on what is the next prominent business model, we see that the platform-based business is one word that's used. Digital ecosystems, which is the word that I used, and as you can see over there, wrote a book on this, and there's a link there if you guys are interested in checking it out. But in the book, I talk specifically about how companies have embraced this, and specifically that companies like Amazon, where their entire business is based on this, and it's not only helped their business, but it's actively displaced their competitors. It has unintended consequences of their own distributor network and supply chain, et cetera. And so, these ecosystems are interesting because what it's doing is it's taken a very sequential world where in the past it was party A talks to party B talks to party C, D, E, F, and G, all the way down the line. And just like the game that we used to play, in school, at least I played in school, the telephone game where you tell someone one thing at the end of the line, and then hopefully that translates down to the other end. What happens is you never get the same message that is all the way at the end of the line. Likewise, within our own supply chains, our own analog ecosystems, we find that data is all over the place. It's very hard to reel in data quality standards across our ecosystem. And so from a very technical perspective, there are some very brittle relationships and integrations between these parties. From a business perspective, there is a significant amount of risk in this interaction because I'm introducing possibility for fraud, whether it be deliberate or not, because sometimes it's not deliberate. I reported on something that is not accurate data. My line of business system recorded it wrong, and I sent it in an Excel spreadsheet, and it got imported into the master system in the wrong way. Or we got 4 different data sources coming in to reconcile. And so what we find is an enormous amount of money is spent trying to reconcile data. And one company that I worked with that shall remain nameless, they were in the business of kind of middle mile supply chain. And when they were trying to reconcile simple things like warranties on parts, what they had an SLA with their partner network, their OEMs, that they would be able to get them their refund within a year. Well, they were 5 years behind and $10 million in the hole that they didn't even know that they were $10 million in the hole for, because they couldn't get a grasp on that information. So digital ecosystems are interesting from the perspective of the kind of the boring side, the operation side of the house. But where I really get excited about it is on the new and compelling experiences that we can create as a result of building these digital ecosystems. Because with this whole digital ecosystem concept, what I can do now is I can create digital twins of a consumer, and I can provide really meaningful recommendations based on the context, situation. I could be in, a middle of a retail store and look at an object and say, just by looking at it, I could give a facial expression, and the store knows that I gave a look of disgust at this mannequin. And it can trigger in real time the set of systems that would need to respond to that and give me alerts to my watch, to my phone, maybe a wearable, whatever it may be, to give real time sentiment analysis, but also recommendations back to me as a consumer. Now, granted, that may be slightly creepy scenario of someone watching us at all times. And by the way, that is a real pilot implementation. Well, that's not made up, but that's where the future is heading. And while we can do this in kind of small, contained ways within like a store context, I mean, the goal is to expand that so that me as a consumer, wherever I go, one, I control my own data, and I give permission to people to leverage that data. Maybe even, here's the crazy part of this, maybe just like with electricity, where we can sell our energy back to the grid using solar. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could sell our data back to Google, Facebook, Macy's, Target? I'm just naming random companies here, but right now our data is being monetized for free. What if we were able to be the owners of this data and to be able to monetize it on an open marketplace? That's the type of power that these digital ecosystems provide.
Great. So just for the audience here, we are going to be getting ready for some Q&A, so feel free to start dropping those questions you may have in there. But we've been talking about this race to the cloud. We've talked about how some of these emerging technologies are playing a part in that race, how new business models are part of this race to the cloud as well. But one of the things that I hear about companies having a concern with the cloud is the idea of lock-in. And so I wanted to bring that one up. You and I think, have had some conversations about this, Mike, about the real transformation of the culture at Microsoft as Satya Nadella took over as CEO, and how he's really embraced a new mindset, not really the competitive mindset of his predecessor, but more of a cooperative, open source mindset. And you've seen that firsthand, being a part of the organization. Can you talk a little bit about how Microsoft views openness in a cloud environment?
Yeah, I mean, being at Microsoft, I'm one of those what we call internally a boomeranger, where I started at the company when Bill G was here and saw a particular style of leadership. Was here when Steve Ballmer was here, and I think what you described, Mike, earlier around this kind of more zero-sum game, that was kind of the leadership principle at the time, where Linux had to lose for Windows to win, or Java had to lose for .NET to win. Those sorts of mentalities, and I think our radical shift to saying, look, let's build great tech, and let's not try to force people into a position and back them into a corner. Let's let the tech speak for itself. And I think that strategy has done two things. One, and probably most importantly, internally, it's put a lot of pressure on Microsoft to build really, really quality product. And so that was a good internal pressure. The external pressure there was, customers didn't feel threatened. They didn't feel like they were going to be taken for a ride, because, many of the technologies that we've created, we've directly open sourced them. And, that's got multi sided benefits to that, from, one, providing a non-threatening type of environment, but also two, I think in this very security conscious world that we live in today, and rightfully so, having that level of transparency, even at the code level, to say, hey, there's no shenanigans here. And also, if there are challenges or issues, let's open source those challenges and issues, and let's figure out the best way of addressing that. And so with some of those principles set forward by Satya and the leadership team, what that's meant for our customers, our partners, even our competitors, is a much more cooperative Microsoft. And so some of the key kind of principles and tenets that we subscribe to, and this is most certainly what I prescribe to my team, is everything we build should be open and extensible. And so while we're trying to prove out maybe the capabilities of our AI ML, maybe we're trying to prove out capabilities of a platform, a marketplace platform, or what have you. However, it still has to be open and extensible, because while one customer might adopt that, we don't want to limit them from saying, well, they had in the past some Oracle implementations or some Salesforce implementations or Siebel or whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we're able to bring along the entire organization, knowing that your transformation isn't going to happen overnight. We've also gone to the notion of, instead of trying to create, finished solutions, going to more of kind of the accelerator approach, where we'll build something where it gets you 60 to 70% of the way there, to illustrate, how you would do this. And for some, it may be 100% of the solution. Some, it may be 10% of the solution. But what this is really to articulate is the power of the platform, rather than forcing a solution down your throat. I think third principle, and this is kind of the proof in the pudding, as they say, where we've actually started consortiums to bring the industry together. So it's one thing as Microsoft to do this, but it's another to provide the industry leadership, like with the Open Data Initiative, where we've said, look, guys and gals, we need to come together and have a common way of talking about these standard types of data, or maybe from an identity perspective and a security perspective, creating these types of consortiums where we're not only living up to our own principles, but also we're setting a standard for the rest of the industry. So I'll pause there. I know that was a lot to kind of take in, but those are just some of the things that we're doing to kind of address some of the aspects that you talked about, Mike.
Well, I know you've got a lot more to share, Mike. You and I have had many conversations over many beers, probably more beers than we should admit to, talking about some of this stuff. And so if folks in our audience would like to learn a little bit more about Mike's perspective on what's going on, Mike does host a podcast called Be Next. Be sure to look that podcast up, and I think you'll get a lot of interesting learnings on emerging technology topics from that podcast. If you'd like to learn more about how Microsoft and Expedient are working together, you can go to go.expedient.com/cloudrace, and you'll see a little bit more about how the two organizations that are represented here today cooperate to help you on your cloud journey. And then finally, just a quick reminder, thank you all for attending. Would love to have you come back next week. We'll be introducing Expedient's new micro-segmentation project. We'll have Vats, Anthony, and AJ coming to talk about that and joining you next week. So please come back next week to learn more about micro-segmentation here at Expedient and how we're making that available to all of you. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.